The number one way of creating emotion in your music is by using chords. They're the foundation for everything else in your song, including the bass, the melodies, and every other harmonic element. Now I'm going to show you how to create 5 emotions with 5 different chord progressions, but first we need to go back to the basics and look at how to create a chord progression from scratch. First is choosing the key or scale of your track, and that's really just a collection of notes that sound good together, kind of like a palette of colours. You're going to use the same key or scale for the entirety of your track. That includes the chords, the bass, the melodies, and anything else harmonic in your track. Once you've chosen a key or scale, usually in most DAWs you can then choose a scale template, which means that it's really hard to hit any wrong notes. So if the key or scale is the palette of notes we get to use, what's the palette of chords we get to use? Well, the simplest way is to use what are known as diatonic chords. Now don't worry, it sounds complex, but all it means is that every note on your scale is the bass note of a chord. So in the scale of A minor, the first chord starts with an A, the second a B, the third a C, and so on until we get back up to A. And each of these chords can be signified with a Roman numeral. Uppercase numerals for major chords, and lowercase numerals for minor chords. And that little circle there is a diminished chord, but we want to avoid them because they sound weird. Now we can do something very cool with emotions when we use notes from without the scale, but we're going to touch upon that in a few minutes. Don't tell anyone. Now in most music there are usually only 3 or 4 chords in the entire track that just repeat over and over. And one of the biggest mistakes I see new producers making is trying to overcomplicate their tracks with too many chords and too many chord progressions. So once we've chosen the scale to work in, let's write in the bass notes of each of these 3 or 4 chords. We want the progression to naturally want to resolve back to the root note of the track. In this instance, as we're working in A minor, the root note of the track would be A. We have to get the bass progression sounding good first, because if that doesn't sound good, the chords are never going to sound good. So once we've got a bass progression we like that wants to resolve back to the root of the track, then we can build out our standard triads. Now building out the standard triads is super simple if you've got your piano roll editor set to scale mode. All we need to do is skip one scale position each time from the root note, like this. Skip a note, skip a note. Again there, skip a note each time. Skip a note, so they look like these little blue hamburgers. And then it sounds like this. Simple but cool. Once you've built your standard chords, we can spice things up by adding the 7ths or the 9ths, which just involves counting up to the 7th or the 9th position from the root of each chord. So we've got 1, 3, 5, 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. 1, 3, 5, 7. And 1, 3, 5, 7, or we could add the 9th as well, which is counting up to the 9th position, like this. Like there and there, and it makes everything sound really nice, like this. Now here's a quick bonus, we can actually create what are called sus4 and sus2 chords as well, and that's simply when we move the 3rd position in that triad up to the 4th above the root note of the chord, or down to the 2nd above the root note of the chord. We'll be using that in a few minutes too. Now most really nice sounding chord progressions share notes from one chord to the other. It makes everything sound more cohesive and gelled together, and we can use chord inversions to help us do that. All a chord inversion is when we change the order of the notes in each chord. So in this example we're going to bring them closer together on the keyboard, which makes everything sound way more professional. So let's bring these 2 down an octave, let's bring these 2 down an octave, and then we've got this effect. Nice! Okay, the 6th stage of chord progressions is the rhythm of the chords. Changing the rhythm can add groove or energy to our track. So first let's try a syncopated riff against our kick drum, keeps things driving and moving forwards. Now the easiest way to do this is to choose 16ths for your grid length, and then just skip 2 16ths each time with your chords, like this. You can see 16th, 2 16ths, 16th, 2 16ths, and we get this really cool syncopated effect. Hear how they dance around the kick? Such a groove. And now let's try another pattern where we're just moving the 2nd and the 4th chord across 1/8 before the beat. I love this because it really pushes the groove forwards. And the 7th stage is the wildcard, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes because it's going to make way more sense. Now the context of the chord is as important as the chord itself. So here's a chord on its own. But depending on which chord comes before or after it completely changes the emotion. Here's one example. And here's another example. That second chord each time is exactly the same, but the preceding chord has created a completely different emotion. So now we've covered that, let's get into creating these emotions, and I want you to guess if you can figure out what emotion I'm trying to convey before we actually get to it, and you might recognize a few of these chord progressions too. Okay, let's get to it. For this first progression, we're going to choose the key of C major. That's the simplest key to work in. It's just all the white notes from C up to C. And these are the chords that we're going to use for this progression. Now, using the Roman numeral system, the first chord we're going to use is the 4th, the second one is the 1, the third one is the 5th, and the last one is the 6th chord, which is a minor. And altogether it sounds like this. And note that second chord is coming in an 8th before the beat and really drives the groove forwards. Now with the melody, can you guess the emotion, and can you actually guess the track as well? So taking that in mind, if we choose a major key or scale and then start the progression with a major chord, more than likely it's going to create a feeling of happiness or joy. Yes, there is a minor chord in here, this 6th, but the 3 other chords in the progression are all major chords. And the track is The Days by Avicii. Okay, for emotion number 2, we are going to choose a minor key and we're going to choose A minor for this. Now in this progression, we're going to start on the 1 chord, but because it's a minor scale, it's a minor chord. So that's the 1. For the second chord, we are going to use the 6. If we start on F, that's the 6th position in the scale of A minor natural. And that chord sounds like this, which is a major. Next, we'll use the 3rd chord, which again is a major. And then the diatonic chord from the 7th position of the scale, which in this instance is G major. Altogether, with the melody, it sounds like this, and I'm going to speed this one up. See if you recognize it. So choosing a minor key and starting on a minor chord is probably going to give you that melancholic feeling in your chord progression.
You were the shadow to my light, did you feel us?
Now the third emotion is one of my favorite kinds of chord progression. For this progression we've chosen the key of G minor. However, if we hit the scale button we can see these notes on this second chord aren't actually all from within that scale, which is when we borrow a diatonic chord from a completely different scale. But it's not a completely different scale, it's simply the major version of the scale we're working in, and it's called the parallel scale. So if we change this to G major, we can see that these notes are all within that scale, but then these ones are not. And this creates this beautiful effect. Which is classic from deep house. Did you guess the emotion for this one? I kind of call it mysterious. Now a few of you oldies might recognize the chords from this track. It's from Hard Drive's Deep Inside. Absolute classic. Now for this next emotion, it's actually the bass progression itself that leads itself to the emotion that I want to create, with a combination of a syncopated chord rhythm. So let's listen to the progression in F major. See if you can guess which track it is. So these bass notes are going from the 6th position, which is a minor, down to the 1st position, which is a major, but we're adding this 7th note to give it that lovely heart melter feel. Then we're going to the 4th position, which is a major, and then we're going to the 5th position, which is a major as well. But it's this progression from going up all the way to down and then going progressively up the keyboard that's giving us this emotion of what I think is hope. With the melody, it sounds like this. Yes. Okay, this last one is an absolute favorite of mine. I've got the chord progression here, and what I've done is I've created it in B minor. Now there's a slight twist to this because we are going to be using some borrowed chords as well. But see if you can guess what the track is and what emotion we're trying to convey. So this is the chord progression without the borrowed chords. Nice! But what happens when we take that scale mode off, and then for this first chord, we're going to choose a borrowed chord, so we're going to move that third to become a major. So this is the 1 chord, because it's B, but now it's a major, so instead of a B minor, which would be the diatonic chord of this key, it's a B major. Then we've got the 3 chord, but with the 7th, and we've inverted that 7th as well to bring it all closer together. Oh, nice. Then we've got the 6 chord, with the 7th added. So that's a major 7th chord. Then we've got the 5 chord, which instead of being a minor is a major because we're using a borrowed chord. And we've added the octave above. Then we've got the 3 chord of the scale, which is a major, but we've added the 7th. And we've actually created a sus2 chord with this as well. So it's a major 7th with the sus2. I told you earlier we'd be using that. And then finally we've got the 6th chord, which is a major, but again we're adding the 7th. So all together, and with the melody, this is what we create. Oh. This is an absolute favourite of mine. Just gets me right there. So, did you guess this track? It is, of course, Deadmau5 and Cascades' I Remember. And the emotion, for me, at least, is nostalgia. Okay, so the wildcard I mentioned earlier is how you can supercharge and inject more emotion into your chord progressions. The way that you do it is with melodies. If you get a mismatch of chord progression to melody emotion, you can end up in a bit of a mess. Kind of like someone on MDMA at a funeral. I'm not speaking from experience, but all I'm saying is that's a potential emotional mismatch. Don't be that guy. Watch this video instead and get your emotions matched up. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, please hit like and consider subscribing to improve your music production each and every week, and I'll catch you over at that next video where we're going to get your melody game on point.